Well, good evening, everybody. Apologies for our slightly late start. We had a little technical issue, but we're working it out right now. I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. My name is Jocelyn Bell, and I'm the editor and publisher of Broadview. Working behind the scenes to help me out tonight is Aisha Habib, who is Broadview's associate editor, and I'm very grateful to have her support. We're so glad that you're here with us this evening. I am speaking to you tonight from the lands of the Tysick Anishinaabe territory, and I honor and recognize the First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which I have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. Today, Port Hope, Ontario is home to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We'd love to know where you're from, so please do say hello from your hometown in the chat space. If you're part of a faith community and want to add that as well, please do. And if you'd like to add in your own land acknowledgement from wherever you are, I invite you to share that as well. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. I want you to know that we are recording this session so we can share this event with others. If you feel uncomfortable with your thumbnail video appearing on this recording, please turn off your video now. Also, please mute your audio or we may mute it for you. This evening, we're going to hear from Reverend Alan Tysick and Tanya Talaga, both of whom were featured in the January-February issue of Broadview. And in a new twist, we're going to try something a little bit different tonight. After our speakers have shared their thoughts, we're going to put you into 3 smaller groups. Alan and Tanya and I will rotate between the groups to help facilitate the discussion, and then we will all come back together at the end. So let's get started with Tanya Talaga. Tanya Talaga is an Anishinaabe-Polish journalist and author who has reported on Indigenous issues for 2 decades. Her latest book, The Knowing, documents her efforts to locate the gravesite of her great-great-grandmother on her mother's side, Annie Carpenter of Fort William First Nation in Ontario. Her journey is also captured in a wonderful documentary that she also wrote and produced on CBC Gem, which is also called The Knowing. In our January-February issue, Tanya was interviewed by Alison Tedford Seaweed about the experience of turning her journalism skills onto her own family's history and offering all of us a better understanding of the history of this country. So please join me in welcoming Tanya Talaga.
Hi, how are you? It's good to see you all. My name is Tanya Talaga, Kamusko Pimujije Pinishish Nagisnakas, Makwadorum. I'm here, I'm in Toronto at the moment. And this is the home of the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm in the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat people. And I'm really grateful to be here speaking with all of you this evening. I can see we've got a real varied group from all over. It's really quite incredible to see. And I see a lot of religious folks are here too, and people of faith. So this was going to be an interesting conversation, I think, between all of us. So a little bit about me, and I will talk to you about my latest book in a moment. So I am an author. I've written 3 books. I have my own company called Makwa Creative. We produce and produce content. We produce documentary films, podcasts. As you heard, we just got finished doing The Knowing, which was absolutely crazy, to be honest with you, because as I was writing The Knowing, I was also writing and producing a 4-part special documentary series for the CBC, and it was so much work. I think I'm still scraping my way out of it, to be honest with you. I started to slow down in sort of mid-December, and I'm going to take a rest for most of January. I think this is one of the only events I've got happening this month, and I'm sort of off the books as of Sunday. But I've been a writer my whole life. I've been a journalist for quite a long time, over 25 years. I started my career at the Toronto Star, and from there I went to starting my own company. And I am also a freelance columnist in my spare time for the Globe and Mail. And I've been writing my column today on Justin Trudeau and the legacy that he has left First Nations people. My my third book, I write all nonfiction books, and my third book is called The Knowing. And The Knowing is a deep dive into the story of Canada. It's a deep dive into the history that is told in this country, the history that we have all grown up with. Um, and I debunk that history quite a bit in this book. The book was supposed to be about Indian residential schools and the children that were lost in the schools, the kids that never came home. Children, thousands of children, as you know, died in these schools. They died of illness. They ran away. They died from violence. They died of malnutrition. There are lots of reasons why the children did not come home. And it was actually 10 years ago when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released their final report. Part of their report dealt with those children and what happened to them and where they went and how Canada could have allowed this to happen. And I remember at the time when the report came out, I remember reading the volume that is on buried children and the kids that were lost at residential schools. And I remember at the time thinking to myself, this should really be a bigger story. Everyone was obsessed with the word genocide and cultural genocide, the phrase that Murray Sinclair, the late Murray Sinclair, used. He was the TRC head commissioner. And I remember thinking to myself, why is nobody writing about the children? Why is nobody looking into this? We've got all these incredible media outlets and wonderful reporters out there that should be taking a hard look at this. And as it would turn out, I thought about it quite a bit. And in 2016, when I sat down with an editor at the House of Anansi Press, and I pitched her two books, pitched her a book on the 7 children who never made it home from their high schools that they went to in Thunder Bay. These are 7 children from Northern Ontario First Nations that have no high schools in their communities. And so they have to leave their families, their language, their homes, everything they know, and travel 400, 500 kilometers south to go to Thunder Bay for high school. And that book, Seven Fallen Feathers, was my first book, and it was released in 2017 to coincide with Canada's 150th birthday. But I pitched 2 books to my editor at that time. I pitched her the book on the 7 children, and I also pitched her a book on Indian residential schools and what happened to the thousands of children that died there. And I remember her saying to me, you should start by writing 7 first. And then once you finish that book, go back and write the larger book, because that's going to be a far greater undertaking. Well, it took me a while, but I got back to that. There was a second book in between, All Our Relations, Finding the Path Forward. And then I started, I guess it was 3 years ago, to write The Knowing. But The Knowing is really a book that was started by my family over 50, 60, 70 years ago. And I say that because my family, like all other First Nations families, has been touched by Indian residential schools, by the child welfare system, by Indian hospitals. Every single First Nations family knows of someone who did not come home from one of these places or institutions, tuberculosis sanitaria, asylums, the schools, the so-called schools. And when I started to really look at writing that book on the children that died, I was thinking about someone in my family that never made it home, and her name was Annie Carpenter. And the more I thought about her and about what happened to her and how she was lying in an unmarked grave here in Toronto, the more I thought that the story of the children that died at the schools and Annie Carpenter, who was my great great grandma, were intertwined. They were part of the same story. That story being the policies, the history, the bureaucracy that sort of did set up two systems in Canada, two classes of people, so to speak, non-Indigenous people and First Nations people. And I say First Nations because if you are a First Nations person like myself, you are a status Indian under the Indian Act, which is a separate piece of legislation that was created in 1876 and passed in 1876. And it governs the lives of status Indians. So I have a 10-digit number that goes with my name, and this is a race-based piece of legislation. Why am I telling you that? Because it's really important you know about this, and you know about the history of our people. And when Canada was growing up all around us, the cost that was paid by our family members, our children, our separation, our violent separation from the land, from each other, from our families. And if you put all of that together, you will find the true story of Canada. And it is told very much through my eyes and through other First Nations families. The knowing, this book is about one family, my own, but every single First Nations family could tell you a similar story. And so that's the book. It's about 450 odd pages. Took me 3 years to write and research, and I had an army of researchers helping me to make sure that, well, I needed the help first off because there was lots of places to look, and the book is by no means complete. We're still finding answers and pieces of the puzzle about the Carpenter family, even to this day. And I suspect I will be doing so for years. And so with that, I'm going to say miigwech for listening to me. And I believe we have someone else who's going to be speaking too about their book.
Yeah, well, just before we get to that, I just want to thank you so much, Tanya. And, I know that each time you share your family's story, that's a vulnerable space for you to talk about the fraught relationships between settlers and Indigenous people. And so I'm just very grateful that you're trusting this group with your story and with your time. And I hope that you get lots of rest after in this coming month, a well-deserved break from all the work that you've done. And so thank you. Tanya's book is available at bookstores across the country, and so we'll just post some information about that in the chat space. Um, so that should be there if anybody's interested in reading it, and I highly recommend it. I'm partway through it. It is 400 pages, so I've been working on it. It's a wonderful book, and I've just learned so much already in the pages that I've read. So thank you for bringing that truth to all Canadians. Um, Next, we're going to hear from Alan. And Alan Tysick is a longtime advocate for homeless people in Victoria. For many years, he ran the Open Door, which is an inner city ministry that later became Our Place Society. Earlier this year, he published his memoir called Muddy Water Stories from the Street. In our January February issue, Al was interviewed by Sherwood Hines about his decades of ministry with the unhoused in Victoria and the experience of trying to help people hear their stories. So, welcome, Alan. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me and looking at my book. Um, it's been 30 years also, this book in the workings, and I'm so glad it came to birth. And I enjoyed writing the book, as difficult as it was at times to write the book. But I never faced the job of marketing the book. And when you get into marketing, it's just another big job. So I have a team around me that I formed around me, old friends, and that team has been working relentlessly on the book and helping me market that book and edit the book. And I also had an artist with me, Alfreda, who did all of the illustrations in the book. The book is really well illustrated. I think it's another book in itself, really. And she did that. So my first thanks goes out to all of my team. Without them, the book would have never become a reality. So that's important to say. The book really dates back to my mother. When I was young, my mother was a devoted Catholic woman who believed completely in the Catholic Church and the Pope, and believed in an all-powerful God, an omnipotent God. Believed in She believed that she wasn't worthy enough to pray directly to God, so she had to pray to the Virgin Mary, who also then prayed to God, apparently, which was a little confusing to me. And we lived on welfare. And in spite living on welfare, my mother worked for the Catholic Church. She cleaned, the altar or something once a week. And in spite that, her faith was she wasn't able to compare our poverty to the church's wealth. She just wasn't able to do that. And but I believed in that all-powerful God as a child. And then one time when I was 11, I look in my cupboards, no food there for my sisters or myself, and I pray. I get on my knees and I ask this God of my mother's to at least put food in the cupboard. At least he could do that for my sisters, not even myself, just my sisters. Uh, the next morning, I run downstairs, open the cupboards, no food in the cupboards. Tears running down my eyes. I went to the marketplace and I stole the food that we needed: a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, some bologna, I think it was. But from that day on, I stopped believing in this all powerful God, and now, which led me to work and live among the poor that I grew up with, and tried to tell our stories and tell us who they really were. And Shusaku Endo introduced me to a God, which is a trampled down God that walks with us in our pain, and not the miracle God that I learned about in Sunday school. But so that led me to study in theology eventually, and at McGill University, and working among the poor in my home around Preston Street in Ottawa, and then later on coming out west and spending 30 years out here ministering to a drop-in center that continually grew since I was here. I just want to say that the generosity of the church, the generosity of individuals that made that ministry possible over over those 40 years. Hushka to you. I've become very close to the Howsett Nation, and they have taught me just so much about my culture and the role my church played in. We're close to Port Alberni, and Port Alberni had a residential school there run by the United Church of Canada. So I learned about that school. I learned about, I talked to many people from my house that had went to that school. Many of them have become my friends since. And uh, over the years that I was ministering on the street there, I continually wrote in a journal stories that I'd come across, funny stories, happy stories, sad stories. But stories, it's really a journal of faith too, of amidst this, of still listening to God. For me, listening to God was like listening in and involving in the symphony of life. In between the notes where there's silence, that's where God spoke. So it wasn't in some retreat or some silent thing that I was at. No, it was in the midst of life itself. I've had God speak to me in someone's eyes, in someone's touch, in someone's death. So I got to know God in a different way here. And as you read through the book, as people read through the book, they'll discover the stories, and the stories are always based on my struggle with faith. And I'm going to say, when I was called by God into the faith, I did not want to go. I was an engineer at the time, and so my struggle with the faith has not been easy. It's not been a glorious, happy time with me. It's always been a time of questioning. Why is the church so secular? Why is the church so white? Why is the church a social club rather than what we say we are and preach about on Sunday? That we preached about one thing. We're real good preachers, but doing it was another thing. I always think of the Lord's Prayer, where it says, "Forgive me for my trespasses." Boy, that's easy to say. But the next line's a little difficult. "As I forgive others." Wow, that's a mouthful and a half. So trying to live out that theology has been difficult and caused me to write this book over the years. And then this team came around me and helped me bring it to birth. It's got a lot of birth mothers. It's got a lot of birth mothers. So that's where the book really originates from and comes from. And some great funny stories in the book. I'll tell just one of them. An evangelistic lady from the Pentecostal church volunteered, really a great soul, a woman that gave a lot. And one day she comes into the center with these little hearts that she was putting on everyone. And the heart said, "Jesus loves you." So she's put on these hearts around. So she did that all day. At the end of the day, I had a First Nation man sleeping in my office, which I often did because he had a rough night. Anyway, he gets up, and his name was George. He was out getting coffee, and she yells across the drop-in center. There's got to be 50 people on it. "You got your heart on." And he looked at her with that smile and says, "No, but that can be arranged." And all the drop-in center bursts into laughter, including herself. It's just moments when we break that fabric of humanity, when we're all one. There's moments like that I experience that were just not First Nation and white, not poor and homeless, but just one people, the whole people of God, I'll say. So it's moments like that kept me going. Moments of, I'm carrying another fellow up a pair 28 steps to his apartment. He had passed out, and his pants fall down to his knees. And he looks at me and says, "Rev, we got to stop meeting like this." It's moments like that kept me going. And I was doing so many funerals during the time of the drug crisis. I was doing 3 or 4 funerals a day. So many people were dying because of overdose. And when older people died that were familiar with the street was one thing, but when young people come to the city to have a good weekend, and their mother has no idea that they're involved with drugs and die of an overdose, it's pretty hard to deal with the family and everyone around that. So that's where the book also comes from. It comes from, I want people to read the book and feel the heartbeat of the poor that I felt, of see their eyes, of feel their compassion, their generosity, the sides we don't see. I want them to realize they're more like us than we think. I remember talking to one lady of the night who said, I never thought I'd be a lady of the night, never, ever, ever. And when I was growing up, I had a good family, and we never know what we'll do. The addiction is so tough. I just can't do. We call it on the street the dragon. The addiction is so tough, so hard. It's so cunning. It's so elusive. It's such a liar. Um, and eventually we sleep with the dragon, and then he owns us. It's a sad plight to see. And the resources in Canada for the addictive and the mentally ill are really lacking. We have done some improvements in these last few years. I want to say this. I want to thank the government for the housing they put up in this last. I want to thank. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go if we really want to end poverty. And retired now, I'm helping some people in the community that have a hard time paying their rent or whatever they're doing in the community that I'm living in. The poverty is deep, and it destroys life. So in the book, it's also asking to be a part of that social justice of ending poverty, of ending what we're facing. I'm um,
I'm gonna
I'm
I'm gonna
just so
jump in there,
honored to be
Alan,
a
if I
part of
can.
this and to listen to the stories that I've just heard. I want to thank your viewers, and I want to thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for that introduction to your work and your book. And just, you've given your whole life to walking with street affected people. And so thank you for that as well. There are several ways to purchase Alan's book, and it's a beautiful book of vignettes and beautiful illustrations, as he's mentioned, and each one is touching and, makes you think, makes you stop and really question your own stereotypes and understand people who are affected by homelessness that much better. If you want to purchase his book through the publisher, Whip and Stock, there's a special code that we're going to share with you now for a 40% discount. And also, all of the proceeds from Alan's book are going to support Our Place Society in Victoria, which is where he spent his career. So now it's time for our discussion, and you're going to get a pop-up message on your screen telling you what room you're going into. Just click on the word join to enter that room. This part of our discussion will not be recorded, so if your camera's off and you'd like to turn it on, I expect our guests would appreciate seeing you and being in more dialogue with people they can see. So please feel free to turn it on. And then about every 10 minutes or so, or a little bit less maybe, you're going to switch leaders. You're going to get either me, Tanya, or Alan, and then we're going to switch rooms. You're going to stay in the room, so don't worry. And then at the end, we're going to have a bit of a warning, and then you'll be all brought out to back to this main space again. So here we go. It's our first time trying this, so hopefully it works well. And off we go. Press join. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you. First and foremost, I would like to extend the deepest gratitude to Alan Tysick and Tanya Talaga for joining us this evening. I'm just so struck by your work and what a powerful testament it is to the strength of the human spirit, the resilience, and of the great spirit that inspires all of us. And so I'm just so grateful that you've shared with us, and please know that your stories will stay with every person who's been here tonight to listen, and we'll carry those forward in our hearts and minds. So thank you and miigwech. I've invited Tanya and Alan to share links to organizations that are near and dear to their hearts. Of course, Alan has asked us to share the link to Our Place Society, and we'll do that in the chat. If you're interested in supporting that, there's a link there. And Tanya has asked us to post a link to Spirit to Soar Fund, which supports cultural programs for Indigenous youth in Northern Ontario. As we conclude tonight's event, I'd like to remind you that Broadview is also more than a magazine, and it's a charitable organization as well. And we are committed to fostering thoughtful dialogue, inspiring positive change, and shining a light on pressing spiritual and justice issues of our time through journalism. Our mission is to engage readers in exploring justice, faith, and ethical living. And to do so, we rely on the generous support of people like you. In some wonderful news for the new year, we have an anonymous donor who has stepped up to sponsor the cost of Broadview's National Online Reading Club in 2025, and we are so very grateful for her support. But if you've enjoyed tonight's event, please consider also making a donation to Broadview. And if you already do donate to Broadview, thank you so much. Your support helps us continue to provide a platform for voices like Alan Tysick's and Tanya Talaga's, and to bring meaningful content to readers across Canada and beyond. So thank you again for being here this evening. Be well, and I hope to see you back for our next online reading club on Monday, March 3rd at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Happy New Year to everyone. Have a good night.